Good morning. This is Pastor Chris from Sevenfold Church. It's great to be here again today. I'm with my lovely wife. Say hello, Sharon.
Hi, everyone.
And it's just me and Sharon today. And you know what? That's okay, because I'm here for the Lord and for whatever He wants me to do, and for whomever He wants to send to me, whether it's in my home or whether it's on live. So, what am I talking about today? Well, I'm going to talk about Psalm 77. Now, in Psalm 77, it talks about basically a man named Asaph who's writing this psalm, and he's talking about how he's going through a lot of heartache, he's going through a lot of suffering, and he's going through a lot of difficulty. And in fact, you could even say he's having a crisis of faith. Now, when we get hit with various trials, and when I say various trials, I mean literally get hit with various trials at once, where we feel like life is hitting us from so many different directions, and it's hard to understand why. And when I preach my message on finding glory in affliction, the question can often be, when something hits you out of nowhere, you're tempted to go, why me? Why has this happened to me? But what about if that trial and that suffering and that circumstance that hits you happens to be about someone that you care about and you love, such as my wife Sharon? Now, Sharon is on the mend today, and I'm truly grateful for that. But I want to read out Psalm 77. And then I want to go into my introduction, and I want to talk about this message. And that message is comfort in the chaos. So Psalm 77 reads, I cried out to God for help, writes Asaph. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, and my spirit asked, will the Lord reject me forever? Will he never show his favour again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in his anger withheld his compassion? Now stay with me, because I'll explain exactly what's going on here in a little while. Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his hand. I will remember the days of the Lord. Yes, I remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. Your ways, God, are holy. What God is as great as our God, he says. See the switch? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm, you redeem your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. I'll explain exactly what he's talking about in a sec. 16, verse 16. The waters saw you, God. The waters saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The heavens resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea. Your way through the mighty waters, for your footprints were not seen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So he's talking about the Exodus. Now let's unpack together. Let's look at a little bit about what this psalm actually means. Now I'm basing my word today on Psalm 77. I want to talk a little bit about Asaph. Who is Asaph? And I want to quote from a really good article that I read. It was written by Christopher Smith. Good name, Christopher Hunt. In comfort there is chaos. Oops, in chaos there is comfort. I had it written around the wrong way here. Sorry about that. Now this reminds us that suffering often tempts us to believe that chaos has the final word. But he points us, Asaph does, back to memory, back to God's proven faithfulness. You know, today we might find ourselves in a situation where we're needing to journey through chaos. As I would say, your life's going one way and something's coming from another way. Almost like you feel like, as my friend Val Rogers used to say, you feel like you've been T-boned by life. You know, in the comfort of remembrance of our God and our renewed trust, we find our way through the chaos. Now, this psalm was written by Asaph. And it's really interesting when you discover a bit more about who he actually is. Now, Asaph was a Levite, a musician, a seer prophet, who served during the time of King David. See, David didn't write all the psalms. He is best known as one of the leaders of temple worship, especially in music and singing. And you might be thinking, Pastor Chris, why are you drawing this out? Because it's easy to think that if someone's musically talented and they're really good with music and they know how to worship God, that they always have a great and strong faith. No, sometimes their faith gets challenged too. Sometimes they find it hard too. Just because you're musically talented doesn't mean you don't sometimes go through trials where you feel like, has God forgotten me? And even singing the songs that you've even written don't necessarily bring you comfort. I thought that was really worth bringing out, because sometimes people can look upon worship leaders or worship teams or pastors or people in ministry and think, wow, they've really got a strong faith. But sometimes faith gets challenged even by people who are in ministry, even by people who do worship, even by people who do ministry and worship. So he was a musician and choir leader. David appointed Asaph. He was a psalm writer. Now Psalms 50, 73 to 83 are attributed to Asaph or his descendants. He was a prophet, seer. 2 Chronicles 29:13 calls Asaph a seer. He was a founder of a worship tradition, the Sons of Asaph, because a guild or group of temple singers for generations after him, and a kind of a worship legacy. In other words, what I'm saying is, it must have been something pretty significant to have come upon Asaph's life, considering he was a prophet seer, a musician, a worship person, a person who wrote psalms. So he was a man who wasn't afraid, right? Who wasn't afraid to be real and authentic in his anguish. He wasn't afraid to be real and authentic in the suffering that he was experiencing. That was keeping him up at night. That's literally what it was saying. His eyes couldn't close, meaning he can't sleep. So this was a significant thing in Asaph's life. You know, I've been through situations recently where I wasn't sleeping very well. You know, when you've gone through a hard time at work, and then you find out a friend of yours, his mother dies, who I knew personally. And then I found out my brother has stage 4 cancer. And just as I was starting to deal with that, my poor wife breaks her kneecap in 3 places. You know, you start to think, you start to wonder. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sleeping very well. You know, and I didn't tell my wife any of this because I didn't want her to worry about me. But the questions were growing around in my mind. What have I done? Why did this happen? What caused this to come about? And folks, this all came about when I chose with Sharon to go back to doing sevenfold. There's no one in this house but my lovely wife. Last time we gathered together, my lovely wife was in hospital. There was 5 people here. But you know what? I moved forward. I keep trusting him. I keep trusting him because it's about him. It's always about Jesus. When I spoke in my message, finding glory of God in affliction, the question I asked and the question I said was, is it still about Jesus when things are going wrong? Mm-hmm. Is it still about Jesus when things are not working out? Is it still about Jesus when you look in your lounge room like I am right now, yes, and all there is my lovely wife? Yes, it's still about Jesus. Always is and always will be. Exactly. So Psalm 77 is about a man named Asaph who is in deep distress because he feels abandoned by his God. Like God isn't listening to his prayers anymore. Folks, one thing, bang, after, bang, another, bang, 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 bang. Yes, yes, I was starting to wonder. I was starting to wonder. I was almost beginning to doubt. And then after Sharon broke her kneecap, I was starting to doubt. Full disclosure. But I kept crying out to my God. And I kept crying out for prayers, and people prayed, and you all prayed, and the people that have prayed, God bless you. Because I needed it, and so did Sharon. You know, at the start of the storm, he cries out to God, but finds no comfort. He is overwhelmed by memories of better times. You think, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, when things are coming at you from left and right and front and rear, you just start to wonder. And you start to try to cling on to something that's going to give you comfort. And I did that. I clung on to something that I thought would bring me comfort. And I began to see, and I began to remember the things where there was just such awesome times with God. And I wondered again, why? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? But I was determined to trust my God. But I didn't have a presence. I didn't necessarily feel an anointing. I just knew that he was there. I knew that he was there. Folks, it got to the point where I remember talking to a counsellor. Yes, sometimes pastors talk to counsellor. And I said to this lady, I said, you know, I'm determined to believe there are better days ahead. And then the phone cut off right in the middle of the call. And I thought to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because I know eventually this will turn around. So he cries out to God. He's overwhelmed by memories of better times when he felt close to God. And now wonders if God has rejected him forever. Big questions, hey, tearing him up on the inside. Stuff like, has God's love failed? Now, we know that's not true. But when circumstances are pressing, when you're having trials, when you're going through sufferings, when you're having so many things happening to you, not one just tough thing, multiple tough things coming at you from left and right, all around. It's hard. It's hard. Has God forgotten to be gracious? These are the questions that the psalmist Asaph was asking. Is God's anger the end of the story? These are all the questions that were in his mind. And you would think, this guy's a worshipper, a talented musician. He wrote psalms, he wrote music, and he's doubting God. It must have been something very significant in his life. Although there's no way of knowing exactly what he was experiencing, it was certainly significant. It was a painful tension for him between remembering God's past faithfulness and feeling abandoned in the presence. You know, our emotions don't tell the true story, but that doesn't mean they're not really being felt. Our emotions are not telling the true story, but that doesn't mean they're not being felt. Amen? So this was a painful tension between remembering God's faithfulness and feeling abandoned in the present. It's a spiritual crisis. He knows God is good, but he just can't feel it right now. Later in the psalm, from verse 10 onward, we see he starts to fight back against his despair in remembering God's mighty acts. Last year, I was going through a trial where I was working for a company, a very difficult situation, and it was really hard to go through. And I was told that we were being replaced by a team that I'd trained up in India called Rightshore. And this was the thing that I clung on to. You know, this was the thing I clung on to last year. I remembered what my God had done for me. End of 2021, the job that he got me was the one that I found myself in last year, that I was being told, you're being replaced. And I just decided to trust my God. You know, and that was one tough thing happening at the time. But lately, the last 7 weeks, I had multiple tough things happening at exactly the same time. And it was hard, folks. You see, he is remembering from verse 10 onwards, the Exodus. You know, we have a God who is a great deliverer. Psalm 34 verse 19 says, the righteous suffer a multitude of afflictions, and God delivers us from them all. So regardless of what may be happening, regardless of what may be coming against you, your God, my God, is our deliverer. And the same God that delivered us, rather the same God that delivered the children of Israel, is the same God that delivers us today. He delivers us today. He's the great deliverer today. He delivers us from the power of sin and darkness. He delivers us from hopelessness. He delivers us from fears. He is the great deliverer. You know, crying out within the chaos. Asaph cries out honestly to God. You know, God doesn't wait for your life to be perfect before he wants to hear from you. He wants to hear from you right in the middle of your pain. He wants to hear from you right in the middle of your storm. He wants to hear from you in your anguish. He wants to hear from you even when the tears are falling down the cheeks. God meets us in our raw, honest prayers, not polished ones. Key point, it's okay, even good, to be real with God in your pain. But here's when it gets real, folks. Asaph tries to remember better times, and initially it hurts. Why? Because he remembers when God was so close to him. He remembers when it felt so amazing, and now he's like, but I remember, but why is it not happening now? He says, I remembered you, God, and I groaned. Have you ever tried to think about the good old days? When you're struggling, you want to think about the good old days maybe, and it's just made you feel even worse because you think, well, it happened then, why is it not happening now? Just because it seems like it's tough doesn't mean God is not at work. Have you ever tried to think about that? This is where Asaph is. See, the thing about pain is it can distort your memory. It can not give you a clear picture always. Pain makes us forget the victories and only remember the valleys. Sometimes memories can hurt. Remembering God at first can bring pain. In a really, really tough situation, you could just think, but why? I don't understand. And as I said, it distorts our memories, makes us forget God's past faithfulness. Sometimes you have to make a conscious decision in the middle of your pain or anguish to remember him, to remember the God that has been there for you before. You see, but Asaph doesn't stop there. As I said, he makes a choice. And it's the same choice you and I have to make. He says, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his hand. 77:10. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to remember God's faithfulness on purpose. He makes a choice. To this I will appeal. Let me say it one more time. Psalm 77:10. To this I will appeal, says Asaph. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand, choosing to remember God's faithfulness. Before it seems like your circumstances are turning, that doesn't mean that God of all goodness and love is not operating. I saw blessings. I saw things happening in the storm. I saw things like when Sharon got to Fiona Stanley, everyone was praying. She got a bed straight away. She got surgery almost straight away. She got looked after so well, and I saw the hand of God in all of that. I saw blessings in my own life. I just needed to be willing to choose him, to choose to remember his faithfulness, to choose even when it was tough, even when it was hard, even when I was crying, even when I was in anguish. I still kept remembering. I still kept choosing to remember. God is still at work. God is still at work. And there is glory in affliction. There is glory occurring from God in affliction. Psalm 77:10. To this I will appeal, says Asaph. Let me just read it one more time. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. So Asaph is choosing to remember the miracles of God. He's disciplining his memory. He's anchoring his heart in the truth, not in emotions. Preach to yourself what God has already done. God's power is found even in our weakness. And often, in fact, that's often when we see his power being made perfect. Amen. You know, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 to 9, we see we are weak jars of clay carrying God's treasure. We may be pressed, perplexed, persecuted, but not crushed, not abandoned, and not destroyed. You see, our weakness is the platform for God's strength to shine. Sometimes we have to talk to ourselves. Sometimes we have to preach to our own soul. Sometimes we have to say, hey, self, or hey, Chris, remember when God healed you? Remember when he provided for you? Remember when he made a way even though there seemed to be no way? Consciously choose to remind yourself. Even when your feelings are shouting fear, shout back at them with faith. This is disciplining your memory. Christopher Smith says this, and I quote, our memories must be anchored in God's truth, not tossed by today's emotions. And here comes the best part. Asaph remembers when God parted the sea, when the people walked through on dry ground. But listen to how he says it. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. It's in the unseen hand of God that we see the most amazing things. Sometimes it's not even until we can actually begin to look back after we've come out of it and we can see. We didn't see the hands. We didn't necessarily see the feet. But when we look back, we can see he carried us. Sometimes you don't feel him right away. Sometimes you may not see his footprints. But that doesn't mean he isn't leading you. The sea can still part. The way can still be made. The chaos can turn into comfort. Because Paul picks the same up. But how does this connect to us today? Well, Paul the Apostle picks this same idea up in the New Testament, where he says, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7 to 9, he says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God, and not from us. We are pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We may be weak vessels. We may even be cracked jars of clay. But inside of us, God has put his treasure, which is Christ in you and me. The hope of glory, his spirit, his power. You know, Paul doesn't say chaos won't come. He says when it comes, it won't break you. You may feel pressed, but you won't be crushed. You may feel perplexed, but you won't be in despair. You may feel struck down, but you won't be destroyed. Why? Because your comfort isn't in your strength. It's in his, the Lord's. Christopher Smith says it this way. The chaos around us may roar, but the spirit within us anchors us. You know, when I came home from hospital after being kicked out and I wasn't allowed back in to say goodnight to my wife, I screamed out to the Lord, help me. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, I felt like literally within my spirit, I was being anchored. You know, the anxiety wasn't taken over. The anxiety wasn't taking control. It began to melt away. So, even when we don't see his footprints, God is leading us. Comfort doesn't always come from chaos disappearing. It comes from knowing God is present, whether you feel it or not. Remember him. Trust in him and watch him work for your good and his glory. You know, maybe today you're crying out like Asaph. Maybe you're feeling the weight Paul talked about. You're pressed, you're perplexed, you're struck down, but you are not crushed, and you are not abandoned, and you are not destroyed. Even when you may not see his footprints, be like Asaph in Psalm 77:9 and declare that God is still leading you through the sea. He will part the waters. He will make the way clear. He will guide you through it till you get to the other side. You know, when I started with Sevenfold again recently, and all hell seemed like it was breaking out. And I just said, God, I'm not quitting this time. I know my wife's in hospital. I'm not quitting this time. I want to see what's on the other side. I want to see what you've got for us. Even when we feel broken, God's treasure shines all the brighter through your cracks and my cracks. You know, there's a process that's known in Japanese pottery called kintsugi. And in kintsugi, they believe that when a jar gets broken and it's put back together, quite often sealed back together with gold, like kind of a molten gold, not exactly sure the process, but when they put it back together, they believe that jar's broken pieces tell a far more interesting story now that it's got a wholeness back. When you feel broken, remember, God's treasure shines all the brighter through your cracks. You know, those scars that he heals us from, they tell a story of his grace. They tell a story of his goodness. They tell a story of his glory. That's what happens when we begin to see him carry us through. When we begin to see that we're overcoming in him. When we come out the other side, that's when we begin to see that our story is his glory. You know, comfort doesn't come from the chaos disappearing. It comes from knowing God was with you in it. And his power is working even now. Cry out to him. Choose to remember him. Trust in him. And stand firm with him. You know, chaos is not your end. It's the place where God will show his glory. God bless you and thank you. And it's been an honor and a privilege for me to bring this word to you today. And I'll say goodbye, and I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day, as I know I will, with my lovely wife. God bless you. Bye for now.